Alright, welcome back. This is going to be the second episode where I'm talking about the Royal Enfield here behind me, and today I want to talk about some of the history behind Royal Enfield, how they came to be, the different models, because that's a real problem people seem to have, is identifying which model Royal Enfield they have, and then we'll talk about maybe some of the quirky stuff about the bikes. So to start off, Royal Enfield was actually a firearms company that existed in the UK in the late 1890s, Royal Enfield Firearms. And then in 1901 they created their first motorcycle. Royal Enfield is the world's oldest motorcycle company still in existence today. And in fact, this model here behind me, the Bullet, is the longest running motorcycle model still in existence today. They started making the Bullet in the 1940s, and then in the 1950s, the nation of India gained their sovereignty, and they were looking for a motorcycle for their military. For whatever reason, they decided on the Royal Enfield Bullet. They ordered about 800 units, and they liked them so much that they decided they were actually going to open their own plant to manufacture the bikes themselves in India. So fast forward a little bit to the late 1960s, 1970s. For whatever reason, the two plants that were in the UK where they originally started making these bikes in Redditch and I forget the other place, something on Avon or something was the name of the city. But anyway, they closed their doors, they quit manufacturing the Royal Enfields. I'm not sure why that is, but they did. Well, India had their facility set up, and in the 50s they had transferred all the blueprints and even tooling equipment over to India so that they could make the bikes themselves. So after the plants closed down in the late 60s, early 70s there, India decided they're just going to keep making them. So they did. And in the 90s there was a little bit of a debate because when they were making them in India they weren't called Royal Enfields. And in the 90s they started trying to use the Royal Enfield name again. This actually went to a court in front of a judge. The judge ended up saying, yeah, you can use the Royal Enfield name. So to this day, the Royal Enfield is made still in India under the Royal Enfield name. And that's pretty much the history in a nutshell. So now that you know the history, let's move on to what model you might have. Now there are some other great videos out there that really get into the older ones, like pre-1960s models, and how to tell the difference if you have a Redditch made or a Indian made Royal Enfield. But for right now, I'm just going to cover the basics. So the earlier models were known as the iron barrels, and that's because very obviously they had an iron jug here for the cylinder. However, mine is a 2008 model, which is known as the AVL, or lean burn engine. And that's because they quit. The easiest way to identify these is to look here. Obviously, mine is aluminum. It's not cast iron. So this is an AVL lean burn engine. These existed from about 2004 to 2008. And this is the Electra X model, most notably says Electra on the side. This is in fact the X. Some have the X here, others don't. Mine didn't. Took me a minute to figure that out, especially since this is a USA model, which can be a little bit different from the other models. There was a period, at least according to Hitchcock's, when I was trying to figure out which one I had, where they used the older, what's called 65, which looks very similar. It almost has the same style frame. But then they used the different engine in them, and we thought that might be what I had. Other notable cues between the models is the older ones have a 4-speed transmission, whereas mine actually has a 5-speed transmission, as it says right there, so that's real easy to figure out. Also, the older ones have a disc front brake, a drum front brake, whereas my Electra X has a disc front brake. Now, in 2008, over in Europe and the rest of the world, they started to switch over to a completely different engine. It looks completely different, and it's EFI, whereas I still have the old carbureted engine. Obviously, there's a carburetor here. Now, one thing that's pretty cool about this particular year model is this was kind of the swan song for the old, style engine. It's pretty much still exactly the same way that these things were designed in 1940s. There's obviously some updates, being like, the cylinder jug is no longer cast iron. We're using a different carburetor, and we've got some extra electronic doodads going on. The Indians added an electric start feature, which is a little bit notorious for failing, but more or less, it's pretty much exactly the same as it was in 1940. Now, that being said, because it's such an old design and everything, these do not make a lot of power. It is a good-looking bike. There are a lot of reasons you might want to own one. Specifically, it's just such a time machine, and it looks amazing. But do not expect it by any means to be a powerhouse. Even though it is a 500cc single-cylinder engine, you're looking at 23 horsepower here, 17 to the wheel. Your top speed is going to be about 70 to 75 realistically. You might be able to get it up to 80, 85 like one time, but you're really just going to be cranking it for everything it's got to get there, and that's not somewhere you want to hang out. So, somewhere you can comfortably ride is going to be about 60 to 70 mile an hour, somewhere in there. And that's with these that have the 5-speed transmissions. Now, on the earlier models that have the 4-speed, the iron barrels like we talked about, they have a saying which is 55 all day, 65 for a while, 70 once. So if that gives you any indication of just how slow these things are, well, be prepared for that. But they do make quite a good bit of torque. I think when I looked at it, was 34 foot-pounds of torque, which is pretty good. And they're a good overall bike. They are very comfortable. They're very versatile. You can go on-road, off-road with them. It's almost like a dual sport. And there's a lot of aftermarket that you can get out there to customize it however you want. You can get a high-swung exhaust for like a woodsman to have more of a trail bike, or you can do more of a road bike with it. Mine, I'm kind of keeping in that dual sport range where I've just got a nice comfortable seat. I really ride on the road more than anything, but anytime I might go camping with my buddies or something, I've got a little luggage rack back here, and I've got some nice tires that can handle gravel pretty well in those kind of conditions. So, it's not the fastest thing in the world, but the history is fascinating, and it looks amazing. And there's just something about the fact that this was designed in like 1940 that's just really cool to me. A lot of people will come up and try to talk to you about it, it seems, especially a lot of older guys. Hey, nice restoration, man. Which, I haven't done anything to this bike really except clean the carburetor. But, some people don't even know what it is. It seems like, a lot of people don't actually. I've had it called a Triumph, and I've had it called a number of other things, but not what it is. And then you'll get the guys who do know what it is. Oh, that's a Royal Enfield. You don't see many of those, So it's just kind of cool. It definitely turns a lot of heads. But it's just a comfortable bike. I don't really like faster bikes that much. I'm not interested in going 100 miles an hour. It is a little bit annoying that I can't take it on a highway, or, highways are kind of okay, as long as it's like a 55 mile an hour highway. But interstates are definitely a no-go. I've done it one time, and I probably won't do it again, and there's a couple of reasons for that. So besides the very low speeds that this thing can accomplish, one of the reasons it's a little bit sketchy to take on like really faster routes and stuff is these tires back here are quite skinny. You're looking at a 3.5 tire in the rear and a 3.25 tire in the front. So they are basically bicycle tires. To give you some perspective, that's the tire on the back of my CM400, which almost takes up my entire hand here. And that is a 130 on that girl, which is actually kind of fat. To give you a little bit more perspective on the KZ over here, we've got this big honker, which this is a KZ 550, and, well, I can't It's in front of the swing arm, so I'm not actually sure how wide this tire is. It's probably like a 110 or somewhere around a 110, I would say. Now the Trail 90 over here, to give you an example of how close they are. There you go. So yeah, she's got really skinny tires on her. She doesn't rev that high either. This engine only revs to around 5,000 RPMs. I haven't really figured that out yet. Some people say 5,300 or 5,400 RPMs. I've got my stuff set for 5,000 max because I really don't want to overdo it. And once you get to those speeds, I mean, it feels like the thing is getting ready to just shake apart. So you don't want to hang out there too long. Typically, when I'm riding, I'm doing like 65 mile an hour, and I'm probably turning about 3,500 RPMs, maybe 4,000 RPMs if I'm doing 70. So you can't really go that fast. But you can have a lot of fun off-road. You know, a lot of people really like to use these as dual sport motorcycles. Personally, I just use mine mainly on the road. I haven't really done much off-road with it. Actually, I don't even think I've had it more than in my gravel driveway for off-road. But, yeah, I mean, they're just very versatile bikes. It's almost like a piece of farm equipment, if I'm honest. It's slow, but it gets the job done. And it's very, very easy to work on if you know what you're doing. I mean, we've got a single cylinder, a single carburetor, very accessible at that. It's not like one of these newer sports bikes where you really got to dig to get to the carburetor, or even something that's considered simple like a Honda Shadow. You know, you still have to dig those carburetors out. This one I can have on and off in a matter of about 10 minutes. So, you know, if anything goes wrong, everything's really accessible and really easy to work on, and that's good because you will find yourself working on it probably quite a bit, at least doing basic maintenance, because it is a very old engine and it does require some constant attention. Some other stuff you might want to know about fluids is there are 3 separate chambers that need fluids on these. Obviously, you've got your oil. Well, your oil filter is here behind a housing, and it's a little bit funky how you change it. Now, it's got these canister filters. These are the oil filters. I always make sure I have some of these on hand because I haven't been able to find them anywhere except for, you know, maybe Amazon or eBay. I prefer to get mine from the Royal Enfield dealer, Hitchcock's, over in the UK. However, you got to order some stuff in bulk to make the shipping cost worth it from them. But what you want to do, actually, is you want to take these out of the packaging and you want to soak these, put them in a Ziploc baggie or something, and let them soak for about 15 minutes. If you don't do that, you're going to have a lot of time where you're trying to crank this engine over after changing the oil, and all that oil is going to be trying to fill up this canister here, and you're going to be robbing the rest of the engine of oil, which is going to, you know, cause some extra wear. So I'll soak mine for 15 minutes and then install them, and that's the last thing I do before trying to turn it all over. Now, underneath the bike, you've actually got 3 separate drain plugs on these, and I think the iron barrels have 4 separate drain plugs that you have to pull to effectively drain all the oil out of them. So if we go on up under the bike here, you'll see the first one here. You'll see the second one here, and you'll see my third one back here. The third one is for the actual tank that holds all of the oil. I forget which way this goes, but one of these is for the sump and one is actually for the pump. And you'll notice I've stuck some really strong earth magnets on there, and that's just to catch any debris or shavings or anything, should anything happen internally in this engine that's causing wear, just to keep it from going through the system. 2 of those 2, the very front 2, have almost like your petcock would have, a long mesh screen filter on it. So you want to be sure to clean that off as well. So you're going to pull all 3 of those, drain all the fluid out, pull the canister apart there. And there's several O-rings as well that are included in these kits I bought. I buy the full kit, but you'll notice there's several O-rings that are in here. There's 2 small ones, 2 big ones. Then you've got a actual gasket for the cap of the canister, and there's somewhere in here too, there's a copper washer that's for the nut that goes on the very end of the canister. So you've got the nut here with the copper washer. You've got that gasket that I was showing you in between the housing and the cap. Then you've got one big O-ring. You've got a washer that comes out of here too with a little O-ring on it. And then in the back, you've got a little O-ring and a big O-ring, if I recall correctly. I'll do another video the next time I have to do an oil change on this so you can see exactly how it goes, because it is actually quite a lot of little bits and pieces, and they do need to go back in the specific order. If you're ever confused, you can go on Hitchcock's website. They have a free manual you can download that shows you diagrams and everything else on their website, so you can always look that up if you get lost. It's better to take the time and look it up and do it right than put it all back together wrong, not have oil pressure, and blow the engine. So make sure you've got all that done correctly. Also with the oil changes, people tend to overfill these all the time. It doesn't seem like anybody really knows if you're supposed to check this dipstick with it. You know, sometimes in manuals they'll tell you with the dipstick unscrewed, where you just put it on there like this to check the level. And other times they'll tell you have to screw it all the way in. Well, I've dug and dug and nobody seems to have an answer on that. So, you know, just pick one way and stick to it, because it's a little tricky to get the oil level right on these anyway. What's going to happen is you're going to turn this engine over. You're going to stop it. You're going to put this to TDC so that you're not flooding things down there and wet sumping. And then you're going to pull this dipstick out and you're going to go, oh my gosh, I haven't put enough oil in it. And you're going to put more oil in it. And then the next time you're going to go to check it, it's going to be way overfilled. And that's because this is your timing case right here. This has all the gears in it for the timing of the engine, this big phallic looking, you know, case cover. And what happens is you actually get about half a liter or even maybe a full liter of oil that gets trapped in here and sits in here. And it will drain back down over time. So what you want to do is run the bike, let it get fully warm, then check your oil level, get it about halfway on that dipstick. It gives you quite the range. I mean, there is really just quite the range here. This is probably going to be wet. But let's see here. There you go. That's about as long as my finger of a range that you can get. And you're going to want to get that about halfway. That way you don't overfill it if some of that oil drains back down or what have you. And just run with it. If you don't have enough, you'll hear it really quickly, actually. But anyway, that's how you do that. Now, your gearbox oil is the next one I want to talk about. You've got an inspection plate here, you've got a fill plate here, and there is a drain plug on the bottom that we probably can't quite see, but there's a drain plug under there on the bottom. It took me a while to find the correct fluid to use. The manual says to use a EP90 gear oil. Extreme Pressure 90 is what that stands for. I found a lot of people are running this and liking it. I found this on Amazon, I believe it was. Miller's Classic Oils. Now, this is an 80 weight 90, but it's been fine in there. I actually noticed quite an improvement from using that. So, I mean, that's just pretty basic. That's just your gearbox. You just want to fill it until it's coming out of your drain hole there, and then put it back, you know, put it back together. So, you know, drain it, pull the fill plug out, fill it up. What I do is I'll actually fill it from here, from the inspection cover, with however much the manual states. I forget how much it is. You might have to look it up. Or if you don't have time to look it up, or you're somewhere where you can't, just pull this plug out too and fill it until it starts coming out here. Once it starts coming out here, you know you're good. You can put that back in and you're good to go. Now, the last fluid I want to talk about, and the last fluid there is on this bike, is the primary fluid. Your clutch is right here. Your stator is right here. Your starter mechanisms are right here. This is the primary cover. This is the fill port. And this is the check port, where you check the level. But there's some funny stuff about this. So in the manual it says 420 milliliters. If you put 420 milliliters in here and you pull that bottom plug out, it's going to come out. You're going to think you're good. And you really are good to go. That is fine. You can run the bike like that. However, There is supposedly a technical service bulletin that was in existence that says instead of using 420 milliliters, you should use 840 milliliters or 920 milliliters. Some people even just put a full liter in it just to play it safe. And that is because it's to protect that starter sprag. Now, if you don't know what a starter sprag is, it's a special bearing that only goes one way, it won't go the other way. And it's on the starter to prevent the starter from turning backwards. That would only happen when you're starting the bike or stopping the bike and the compression from the engine, that piston isn't all the way up and it's got all that pressure on it, it's going to kick backwards a little bit. That bearing's designed to not let it roll backwards. So as you imagine, that puts a lot of force on that bearing. And I guess when the Indians decided to, put electric starts on these, they kind of missed the chapter on reliability because they are notorious for exploding the bearings. In which case, don't use your electric start. In fact, a lot of people will just get the older style pre-electric start side covers and swap them on here and just delete and do away with everything starter related. Or they'll just use the Kickstarter all the time. It does have a Kickstarter on it. It is pretty difficult to kick over. It feels like kicking over a two-stroke dirt bike for whatever reason. But yeah, I luckily haven't had any issues with mine, so I've just always used the electric start. I've only had to kick it over once or twice, but that is something to be aware of. Speaking of starting and stopping, there is a decompression lever here, which really all it does is it goes down to your tappet cover there, and it pulls that little guy up or down. So all you're doing here is you're actually lifting your exhaust valve up so that you can't make compression. And if we don't have that compression, we don't have that kickback of the piston, and we don't have that starter sprag exploding. So what I typically do when I start the bike is I put this on just a little bit, because if you pull it all the way, the bike isn't going to start. It's not going to make enough compression to start. But just to take a little bit of pressure off things, I'll pull it back about halfway. I'll hit the starter button, and while I'm hitting the starter button, I'll kind of let off of it and let it do its thing, and it usually starts right up. It has maybe a little bit of trouble without that compression being there, but it'll, catch once you put it back, and then you're good to go. Now, when I stop the bike, I never turn the key because that'll have that kickback, and that is 9 times out of 10 what causes that sprag to explode. So anytime I get done riding the bike, I will just pull this until the engine stalls out and dies from not making compression, and then I'll let it go, and then I'll turn my key off. So that's really, if you want to play it safe, put you some extra fluid in there, and always stop your bike using the decompression lever. As well, if you're going to kick the bike over using the Kickstarter, it's got quite the force on it, so again, just like you would a dirt bike or something, pull that decompression lever, but don't pull it all the way or you won't be able to start the dang thing. One thing too I should mention, and I just found this out the other day, but under here, under this battery cover is, well, your battery. I don't necessarily believe you need the battery to run the engine. I think the battery just runs your accessories and stuff like that. But it will spark, I believe, without the battery in there. I haven't actually tried that. But what I found out the other night kind of blew my mind. I've got a 12-volt battery on here, and in my previous video, I had talked about thinking that my regulator rectifier was overcharging the bike, because I would notice as I was riding at 3,000 plus RPMs, I was getting 15.5 to 16.5 volts on my battery here, thanks to my aftermarket speedometer alerting me. And that's actually normal. These bikes will put out 16 volts when they're running. At idle, I'm putting out about 13 to 14 usually, and that's normally what you see. And so I thought everything was actually hunky-dory because, after I got this bike and got it running, because I bought it non-running, I got it running and I put my multimeter on there and I saw, 13.5 volts, 14 volts at the battery, and I said, okay, regulator, rectifier, stator, all that's working, we're good to go. And I never once thought about it again until I got that aftermarket speedometer, which actually shows me my voltage and has warning lights and stuff set for under voltage, over voltage. And I thought, wow, that's really crazy. And then I got on the forums and I found out a lot of people were running, especially on the classics and stuff, they were actually running those lithium batteries that you would have in like your drill or something. I thought I had one over there and I don't. But they were actually wiring those up to run because they're usually like 16 to 20 volt lithium batteries, and it doesn't really power much except for your accessories. So I thought that was very interesting. Apparently a lot of people talked about it overcharging the battery and causing the acid in the battery to come out the tube and dripping on the frame and hurting the frame and stuff. I do have a drain tube on mine, so if it's ever done it, it's spit it out on the ground, and I've probably never noticed. But yeah, so that's one thing to keep in mind too. I'll probably be switching out my battery here for see if I can't find like a lithium 16 volt battery or something to put on here. Or I may just, you know, rock the 12 volt battery and see how long it lasts. I've already put probably 1,200 miles on this bike and it hasn't been an issue so far. So we'll just kind of see what happens there. But that was something very interesting I learned the other night. It seems like every day I'm learning something new and interesting and quirky about the Royal Enfield. And that's kind of honestly, I like to tinker with stuff. So that's one of the reasons I like to own it. At this point, I think I've pretty much got everything where I want it to be. We're just going to maintenance it. I might get some saddlebags at some point. Not really decided on that yet, but probably not. Another quirky maintenance feature that I found was the chain slack. You know, a lot of bikes are usually like 3/4 of an inch to an inch, and this one actually has a full 2 inches of slack that it's supposed to have in it. There is a proper way to measure this. You know, there's a bunch of videos on like RevZilla and stuff like that you can watch about how to actually measure your chain slack, because it's not exactly the way you might think it is. Go check their videos out if you're not sure how to do that. And as far as rear adjustment goes, you've got all these notches, very similar to a dirt bike on how you adjust your front to rear, you know. The newer style bikes have it pretty much set up like a newer style bike would have, and by that I mean they have something along the lines of this style of adjuster where you actually have a lock nut and you can screw it in and out and it just slides. But these have the rotating notches, just kind of like an old dirt bike would have. Also, when I changed the tires on it, I found out something quite interesting. The whole mechanism with the chain and everything here stays on the bike, and just the wheel comes out with those, you know, rubber pieces like you always see if you've ever done a tire. There's those couple of rubber pieces inside the hub. Well, those come out with the wheel, but everything else stays here. It's bolted onto the bike because there's actually 2 nuts on here that hold things together. So this whole mechanism will stay together. So if you ever change a rear tire on one of these, you don't have to worry about getting the chain off of the sprocket or anything like that. It can all just stay right where it is, which makes the job easy, but then the job gets a little difficult because of how big the fenders are and stuff. I really had to skyjack this bike in the air to get the tires off of it to get them changed. I will say they were some of the easiest tires I think I've ever changed though, despite being so skinny. They're 19-inch front and rear, so they're pretty massive. Now I've got the bike outside and where we can really get a good look at it. And I'm gonna go ahead and start it up for you and let you hear how it sounds. Mine will sound a little bit different than the factory because I've got that BSA muffler on here, which has just been pretty cobbled together. But you can see my nice job there fitting it. But yeah, so this is just a BSA muffler I got from my buddy that's similar to the ones that come on the Rocket 3. But anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and start it up. It gets up to temperature quite quickly, actually. There's our fuel on. I can see it flowing through our little thing. We'll go ahead and turn the ignition on here. Get our nice little sweep. We've got 12.2 volts. We're a little low. Now we're at 17. We're going to pull that decomp lever a little bit, and then we're going to hit our starter button. I'll have to sit the phone down so I can give it a little bit of throttle here and pull our choke, which I almost forgot to do. But yeah, let's go ahead and start this thing up. Now I have rejetted the carburetor. I'm running a 120 jet, main jet, and a 17.5 pilot jet right now because I do have that more free-flowing exhaust, and they burn really lean from the factory, so I wanted to go ahead and give it, you know, more of a rich mixture going on. Let you hear that exhaust. So we're gonna give it a second to warm up here, and then I'll give it a couple of revs for you and let you hear how it sounds. There it goes, it's idled up really good, really fast all of a sudden. So we're pretty warm. So let's hear that exhaust real quick. So yeah, she sounds pretty good. I quite like the way they sound. Let's see here. We're a little low on our RPMs. We want it to be about 1,000. Might need to crank that up. I always find when I ride, it tends to come back a little bit. And we're gonna kill the bike. And that's how you want to do it. So that pretty much does it for this episode. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope this helps somebody who may in some years come across one of these bikes that they want to buy and end up in the same boat I was, where I couldn't find much information out about them, and end up scouring YouTube and everything else trying to find what little bits of info I could find. So I'm pretty much just doing these YouTube videos to leave a little bit of a breadcrumb for the next guy who comes along who needs some help finding some information out. Would definitely recommend checking out the Royal Enfield unofficial forum online. There's a lot of helpful guys there, and you know, just loads of information. However, if it's anything like my old 240SX was, sometimes those sites get shut down and all that information gets lost. So that's another reason I'm doing these videos. But anyway, that's it for today. Yeah, so you all have a good one, and we'll see you later.